Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In the next episode, Femi and his friends are drawn deeper into the stranger's sinister game, where every choice carries life-altering consequences. Haunted by eerie encounters and cryptic warnings, their unity is tested by fear, betrayal, and doubt. As the group struggles to navigate the twisted reality they're thrust into, the true power of the stranger begins to unfold, pushing them to the brink of despair. The stakes skyrocket as they are forced to confront their own desires, past mistakes, and the dark bargain they unknowingly made. Can they find a way to break free, or will they be consumed by the shadows? Stay tuned to uncover their fate in this relentless struggle against a force that defies reason. The following morning, Femi gathered the group together at a small cafe in the heart of the city. His face was pale, his eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. He hadn't slept all night, and now the weight of the stranger's threat hung heavy on his shoulders. "We have a problem," Femi said quietly, looking around at his friends. Amara, Chioma, Tunde, and the others sat in tense silence, sensing that something was very wrong. I saw him again," Femi continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The stranger. He found me last night." Amara's eyes widened in shock. "What? Where? What did he say?" Femi hesitated, unsure of how to explain the dark encounter. He wants us to come to him. He said that if we don't, we'll lose everything. Our lives, our success, everything." Tunde frowned, shaking his head. "And you believe him?" "We broke the ritual. We are free now." Femi looked down at the table, his hands trembling. I don't know what to believe anymore." Chioma leaned forward, her voice steady but filled with concern. "Femi, this is exactly what he wants. He's trying to scare you into giving up. We can't let him control us." But Femi wasn't so sure. The fear that had been building inside him for days now felt like a suffocating weight on his chest. The stranger's words echoed in his mind, filling him with doubt and dread. "Maybe we should go," Femi muttered, his voice barely audible. "Maybe it's the only way to stop this." Amara's face twisted with shock and disbelief. "What are you talking about? You can't be serious." But before Femi could respond, something strange happened. The air in the cafe seemed to shift, and a sudden, overwhelming feeling of unease settled over the group. Femi's phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he looked at the screen, his blood turned to ice. It was another message from the stranger. "You have one more day. Don't disappoint me." Femi's hands shook as he showed the message to the others. The tension in the room was palpable, and they all knew that the time for decisions had run out. But as the day passed, a sense of betrayal began to grow within the group. Femi's suggestion to go to the stranger had planted seeds of doubt and suspicion. Could they trust one another? Could they even trust themselves? And as the clock ticked toward the stranger's deadline, one thing became clear: nothing would ever be the same again. As the day dragged on, tension between the group members grew, and Femi could feel it seeping into every conversation. The unspoken threat from the stranger had planted doubt in all their minds. That evening, they gathered in Amara's apartment, hoping to figure out their next steps. The dim light in the living room flickered, casting shadows that danced ominously on the walls. Each of them was deep in thought, yet the silence in the room spoke volumes. "We need to make a choice," Chioma said, breaking the uneasy quiet. "Are we going to meet him or not?" Femi rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of the question crush him. The decision felt impossible. He had no idea what the stranger really wanted, but one thing was certain, ignoring him didn't seem like an option anymore. "I hate to say it," Tan spoke slowly, "but what if we go? Just to see what he wants? Maybe we can find a way out once we know more." Amara shook her head, her expression stern. "That's exactly what he wants. He's playing with our fears. If we go, we'll be walking right into his trap." "But what choice do we have?" Femi muttered, staring at the floor. "He'll come for us either way." Chioma sighed deeply, her face tight with anxiety. "We could all just leave. Get out of Lagos. Run." The suggestion hung in the air for a moment, but they all knew the truth: there was no running from someone like the stranger. Wherever they went, he would find them. As the arguments went back and forth, Femi's phone buzzed again. He looked down, dreading what he might see. "Time's up." The message sent a chill through his veins. Femi's pulse quickened, and his throat tightened. The stranger's deadline had passed. Whatever was going to happen, it was already in motion. Suddenly, the lights in the apartment flickered violently before going out completely. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, no one moved. Then, as if on cue, the front door creaked open. A cold gust of wind blew in, sending papers flying across the room. Femi's heart pounded in his chest, and he could hear his friends gasping in the pitch blackness. Who's there?" Amara's voice trembled, barely masking the fear that gripped her. No response came, but the darkness seemed to grow thicker, like a living thing, filling the room with a suffocating presence. And then, out of the silence, a familiar voice echoed through the space. "You made your choice," the stranger's voice purred, sending shivers down their spines. "Now, face the consequences." Before anyone could react, the blinding light filled the room. In its center stood the stranger, his figure shrouded in an aura of shadow, yet his piercing eyes glowed with an unnatural light. The group froze, fear rooting them in place. "I gave you a chance," the stranger said softly, his voice like a snake's hiss. "But you chose to defy me." Chioma let out a shaky breath, her voice breaking. "What do you want from us?" The stranger smiled, a wicked, knowing grin. "I've already told you. You sought fame, fortune, influence, and I gave it to you. Now, I require something in return." Amara stepped forward, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "We won't do it. Whatever you want, we won't give it to you." The stranger's expression darkened, and the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. "You think you still have a choice? You think you can defy me?" In that moment, Femi realized the truth: the stranger's influence had already wormed its way into every aspect of their lives. Their success, their platform, everything they had achieved was tainted by his power. And now, they were trapped. The stranger raised a hand, and with a flick of his fingers, the entire apartment began to warp and twist. The walls stretched and bent, turning the familiar space into a nightmarish landscape of swirling shadows. The floor beneath them cracked open, revealing a vast, dark void below. "You wanted power," the stranger's voice boomed, filling their heads with an overwhelming force. "Now, I will show you what true power is." Suddenly, the group felt themselves being pulled toward the dark void. Femi's heart raced as the ground beneath his feet gave way. He struggled to hold on, but there was nothing to grab, nothing to stop him from falling into the endless abyss. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him was the stranger's glowing eyes, watching with cold amusement as they all fell into the unknown. Femi awoke with a jolt, gasping for air. He was lying on cold, hard ground, surrounded by nothing but darkness. His head throbbed, and his body ached, but he was alive. Slowly, he sat up, trying to get his bearings. The others were there too, Amara, Chioma, and Tunde, all sprawled out on the ground, unconscious but breathing. They had all been pulled into this strange, otherworldly place, a realm that felt both familiar and terrifying. Femi staggered to his feet, trying to shake off the lingering dizziness. "Where are we?" he muttered to himself, though he already knew the answer. This was the stranger's world, the place where he held absolute power. As the others began to stir, a voice echoed in the distance, faint but unmistakable. "You wanted the truth," the stranger's voice called out from the shadows. "Now you will see it." Femi's stomach churned as he helped the others to their feet. They all looked disoriented, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. "What is this place?" Amara asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," Femi replied, his mind racing. "But we need to find a way out." But there was no way out. The darkness stretched on forever, and the air was thick with a sense of doom. They were trapped, caught in the stranger's web, and there was no telling what horrors awaited them. As they stumbled forward, the ground beneath them shifted and cracked. Strange figures began to emerge from the shadows, twisted, grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and pulse with dark energy. Their eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the strangers, and they moved with unnatural speed. "Run!" Femi shouted, but it was too late. The figures swarmed around them, cutting off their escape. The grotesque figures closed in, their warped shapes flickering like shadows in the dim light of this twisted realm. Femi's heart pounded in his chest, and his legs felt frozen as the creatures encircled them, blocking any hope of escape. Tunde, wide-eyed, grabbed Femi's arm. "What are these things?" "I don't know," Femi whispered, his voice tight with fear. "But we can't stay here." Amara stepped forward, her trembling voice holding a note of defiance. "Whatever you are, leave us alone." The figures only advanced further, their hollow eyes burning with an unnatural glow. Femi could hear whispers in his mind, frantic, unintelligible words that sent a chill down his spine. He realized the stranger's power was stronger here. This place belonged to him, and the creatures were part of his nightmarish army. Suddenly, one of the figures lunged at Chioma. She screamed, stumbling back into Femi. The creature's hand stretched out, inches from her face, when a blinding flash of light erupted from the center of the group, sending the figure flying back. The others halted, retreating slightly. "What was that?" Tunde gasped, looking around in confusion. Amara, breathing heavily, held out a charm, a small, ancient-looking trinket she had always worn around her neck but never mentioned. "It must be this. My grandmother gave it to me," she said. "It would protect me from evil spirits." The figures hissed, their bodies twisting and contorting as if in pain. They were repelled by the light radiating from Amara's charm. For the first time since arriving in this dark world, Femi felt a flicker of hope. "Keep holding it up," Femi urged, pulling Chioma to her feet. "It's the only thing keeping them away." Amara nodded, her hand trembling as she raised the charm higher. The creatures continued to writhe in agony, backing further away. But Femi knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The stranger was still out there, watching, waiting for his next move. "We need to move," Femi said, scanning the dark landscape for any sign of escape. "Before the stranger comes back." The group huddled together, inching away from the figures that still lurked at the edge of the light. Every step felt heavy, as if the ground itself resisted their movement. Femi could feel the weight of the stranger's gaze on them, oppressive and relentless. "Where do we go?" Chioma asked, her voice shaky. "There's nothing here but darkness. We'll figure it out," Femi replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. He was relying on instincts he didn't know he had, navigating a world that made no sense. As they walked, the darkness seemed to shift around them, warping reality. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, low murmurs, distant wails, and the faint hum of something or someone watching them. Every now and then, Femi would glance over his shoulder, expecting to see the stranger or his minions closing in again. Time passed strangely in this place. It felt as though hours had gone by, though there was no way to measure it. The oppressive atmosphere wore down on them, and even the light from Amara's charm began to flicker. "I can't hold this forever," she said, her voice strained. "We need to find somewhere safe." "Safe?" Tunde scoffed. "There's no such thing here." As if to prove his point, the ground beneath them suddenly cracked open, revealing a deep chasm. They stumbled back just in time, watching as the gap widened, swallowing everything in its path. "We are trapped," Chioma cried, her eyes wide with panic. "No," Femi said, determination surging within him. "There's always a way." His mind raced, trying to remember anything the stranger had said that could help them now. The stranger had promised them power, influence, and success. But he had also mentioned the price they were now paying in full. There had to be a way to reverse it, to break free from this nightmarish bargain. Suddenly, Femi remembered something. The stranger had talked about choices, about how they had chosen fame and influence over everything else. Could the key to escaping this place lie in undoing that choice? "We need to renounce it," Femi said, his voice trembling with realization. "The fame, the success, everything the stranger gave us. We need to give it all up." "What?" Tunde looked at him in disbelief. "Are you serious? After everything we've worked for? If we don't, we are going to be trapped here forever," Femi replied, his tone urgent. "This place is a reflection of the deal we made. The only way out is to reject it." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Giving up their fame and fortune felt like giving up a part of themselves. But as the ground continued to crack and the creatures circled ever closer, it became clear they had no choice. Femi stepped forward, raising his voice toward the empty void. "We renounce it. We give it all up, fame, power, everything." At first, nothing happened. The ground continued to crumble, and the darkness closed in. But then, a strange silence fell over the landscape. The creatures stopped moving, frozen in place. The chasm stopped widening, and for the first time, there was a faint glimmer of light on the horizon. It was working. "Everyone, together," Femi urged. One by one, the others joined in, their voices rising above the chaos. "We give it up. We don't want it anymore." The light on the horizon grew brighter, pushing back the darkness. The figures that had haunted them began to dissolve, their twisted forms unraveling into nothingness. The air around them lightened, and for the first time since arriving in this nightmarish realm, they could breathe freely. But just as hope filled their hearts, a familiar voice rang out, cold and menacing. "Do you really think it's that easy?" The stranger appeared before them, his eyes glowing with fury. The air around them grew cold and still as the stranger appeared, his figure casting an imposing shadow over the group. His eyes glowed with a sinister light, and his smile was sharp, almost mocking. Femi could feel the weight of the stranger's presence, thick and suffocating. Their victory, if they could call it that, had been brief. "Do you really think you can just walk away?" the stranger asked, his voice calm but laced with venom. "After all, you made your choice. Now you think a few words of regret can undo everything." Femi stood tall, although his heart pounded in his chest. "We didn't know what we were getting into. This isn't what we wanted." The stranger's laughter echoed through the dark void, cold and cruel. "Oh, but it is. You asked for fame, for success, for influence. And I delivered. But you never stopped to consider the cost, did you? Tunde stepped forward, his voice shaky but defiant. We didn't ask for this nightmare. You tricked us. Tricked you? The stranger raised an eyebrow, amused. I offered you everything you ever desired. You wanted fame, to be adored by millions. You wanted power, the kind that bends the world to your will. I didn't force you to take it. You chose. The ground beneath them trembled again, as if the entire realm responded to the stranger's rising anger. Femi glanced at Amara, still clutching the charm tightly in her hand. Its light flickered weakly, barely holding the shadows at bay. We are not afraid of you, Amara said, though her voice wavered. We'll find a way out of this. The stranger's smile grew wider, more menacing. Is that so? Then let me show you what happens when you try to cheat the devil. With a flick of his hand, the world around them shifted. The dark void twisted and morphed, and suddenly they were standing back in Lagos, in the very heart of the bustling city. But something was wrong. The streets were empty, the sky an eerie shade of red, and an unnatural silence hung in the air. This is Lagos, isn't it? Tunde whispered, looking around in confusion. But why does it feel so wrong? Because this is my Lagos, the stranger replied, stepping forward. A version of your world, twisted by the power you sought. You see, your desires have consequences. Everything you wanted has a price, and now you're going to pay it. As the stranger spoke, the city began to change. Buildings crumbled into dust, streets cracked open, and shadows slithered across the ground like living creatures. The air was thick with the smell of ash and decay. Femi could feel the weight of the city pressing down on them like a suffocating blanket. You can't do this, Femi said, his voice filled with desperation. We didn't ask for this. But you did, the stranger replied, his tone calm, almost condescending. You wanted fame, influence, power, and now you're seeing the consequences of those desires. You wanted to bend the world to your will, and now the world is bending you. Amara, still holding her charm, stepped forward. We are not playing your game anymore. The stranger's eyes narrowed. Game? Oh, this is no game, my dear. This is reality, your reality. You're trapped here because you couldn't resist the temptation of power. And now, you'll live with it for eternity. No, Femi said, stepping forward. We'll find a way out. We'll break free from this. The stranger tilted his head, intrigued. Oh. And how do you plan to do that? Femi thought back to everything that had happened, to the choices they had made, and the mistakes they now faced. He knew the answer wasn't in fighting the stranger head-on. The devil thrived on conflict and chaos. They had to approach this differently. We reject your power, Femi said, his voice steady. We don't want the fame, the influence, the control. You can keep it. We are done with you. The stranger's smile faded slightly, though his expression remained unreadable. Interesting. But it's not that simple. It is, Amara added, her hand tightening around the charm. We choose to walk away. We won't let you control us anymore. For a moment, the stranger said nothing, his eyes glowing brighter as he studied them. Then, slowly, he began to clap, the sound echoing through the crumbling streets. Bravo, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You've learned something, at least. But you're forgetting one thing, you signed a deal. You can't just walk away from that. We didn't sign anything, Tunde argued. You tricked us. The stranger's smile returned, wider and more menacing than before. Tricked? No, my friends. You may not have signed a contract with your hand, but you made a choice with your hearts. And that's more binding than any signature. The ground beneath them began to crack again, the shadows closing in. Femi felt panic rising in his chest. They had come so close to breaking free, but the stranger's power was still too strong. Was there no way out? "Let's see how far you're willing to go," the stranger said, raising his hand. The city continued to collapse around them, the sky growing darker with each passing second. Because the game has only just begun. As the world around them crumbled, Femi realized that this was only the beginning of the real battle, a battle not for fame or power, but for their very souls. The city of Lagos is crumbling around them, swallowed by darkness. Will Femi, Amara, Tunde, and Chioma save the city of Lagos? Join our final episode to find out.